Hi all, let's look at the amazing game between Magnus Carlsen and Vachier-Lagrave, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, in round 5 of the Gashimov Memorial. Magnus kicked off with knight f3, quite flexible. We have knight f6 and now g3, so avoiding like a very sharp opening for a very quiet continuation, and black makes the game very exciting here. This move b5, it's actually been played over 1,000 times before in live book. But okay, bishop g2, bishop b7, and now an unusual move, knight a3 is played here, usually by just castles or d4, but knight a3, a6, c4. There's still about 30 games even from this position though, and black is often playing b4 here, knight coming back to c2, hitting the pawn. Black protects the pawn. We have d4, a5, now white castles, bishop e7, and this looks like a thematic move from certain variations of the Queen's Indian defence. This next move, d5, a temporary pawn sacrifice. This mechanism has been seen in other openings. So if e takes, we have knight h4 pinning the pawn, and we've got the f5 square. So something like g6, this is quite pleasant. C takes, getting the pawn back with a nice space advantage, and you know, this would be dangerous for black. It's a dangerous position here in general. Yes, that's not very pleasant at all. So yes, this d5, black leaves that in light of this powerful knight h4, and basically this bishop's a bit out of the game now, and so Magnus has got a very nice opening advantage here. Basically, he plays actually now knight fd4, again tempting black to take the pawn, because you know, things like knight f5 is still good here. Knight c5, rook e1, and again this is on, but you know, black doesn't want to give up the f5 square, and ends up here now with the bishop just out of the game, with the prospect even of e5, trying to get a big space advantage, kicking the knight back, and that looks pretty horrible. So black stops white from playing e5 by playing e5 himself. We have knight f5, and so white has the luxury of being able to get the bishop pair here. d6, but Magnus doesn't do this. Actually, he plays a very interesting move instead, which at one level superficially would seem tactically a little bit suspect. Magnus plays bishop g5, and it is a loose piece. It's not protected by anything, and there is a battery here actually in effect, but let's see, do you see the tactic that black tried here, which might seem quite tempting, and I know the feeling very well myself from over board games about tempting moves, but yeah, you've got to factor in the opponent's resources a lot in your brilliant combinations around your king. So what was the amazing move black played here? What do you think if I give you 5 seconds to try and win material based on the loose piece, and another 500 points if you see the refutation? Okay, knight takes d5 because the knight's actually protecting here. So was this a blunder by Magnus? Not really. Okay, of course he doesn't want to take on e7. Yes, he's just a pawn down without anything here in particular. No, but he's got a fantastic move in this position instead, which actually kind of positionally gives white a very pleasant advantage now. So white to play and achieve a very, very pleasant advantage. If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, even though I pawn down, bishop h6. So the knight's hanging, this is attacked. And the point is, well, on g takes we have queen g4 check now. If the king moves, then it's queen g7. Checkmate, thanks very much. So basically black is forced to play this. And then we have c takes d, where white is threatening h4. So the king moves. h4, and after the dust has settled here a bit, it's clear white has quite a dominating position here. A lovely knight on f5, which he now reinforces, and has got lovely moves available like knight takes and queen h5. Black tries to pin that knight for a moment, And Magnus actually doesn't go in for queen h5. He actually drops the queen back here, so unpinning, with the potential of knight takes h6, of course. Black actually protects that, but it's a very passive position. And now Magnus reinforces the f5 square, but not only that, this structure is actually compromised. There's no g6 pawn, and actually this is an interesting maneuver, just to add more attacking pressure on the light squares. And we have actually rook g8, bishop g4. Black now plays queen f6, and now bishop h5. So restricting black's options quite a bit. Sitting on the light squares, it's a very pleasant position. Knight g4 is now on the cards, which will be quite nasty to win h6 after if the queen went back. So bishop takes f5, knight takes f5, and it's just such a dominating position. If you look at white's pieces, this extra pawn isn't really worth anything. This horrible extra pawn is blockaded by the bishop. Lovely light square control, and it's difficult to contest these outposts, highly reinforced outposts. Black tries to get some sort of play going now with c6, though, trying to get his rooks on the c file, and potentially, of course, he has objectively got a space advantage here. So if he can make use of the c file infiltration, then optimistically Black might have an interesting game. So we have d takes, which does provide frontal pressure though on the d pawn. There is a downside to this play from Black. Rook ac8, and now an Alekhine type move. He's been known to play this sort of retreating move. Can you spot it? White to plays a lovely positional move, which is great for centralization. That's the clue. If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, queen d1, just queen retreat. It's unbelievable, isn't it? But sometimes retreating, going straight into the centre. So the queen has completely changed position in a dominant position in the centre here. Rook takes, queen d5. The other rook protects, rook a1. So great pressure on d6, as well as, of course, these points. So this is a fantastic knight on f5, basically. Bishop f8, very, very passive looking position from Black. But, you know, if given a few moves, to be fair, you know, Black could do something in the c file. And he's trying to offer this pawn, which is now taken, of course. Well, not of course. There are other things to do. But yes, the pawn is actually taken by Magnus. Queen takes. So, yes, got the pawn back. Finally, 6 pawns each after that. You might just wonder, before we go on from there, why couldn't Black have done anything here? Well, it is a lot of pressure in this position, and if White wanted to, I guess he could have also, in this position, considered taking here, but yeah, he put the pressure on first with rook ad1. It was actually a double attack anyway on c6 and f7, and if here, then d6 was dropping off. Okay, so that's the sequence which got the pawn back from Magnus. Okay, but we have now this knight a4, so isn't this Black's whole idea that he can use the c file? Remember, he has got the dead bishop, the dead looking bishop though. Rook e2, and now rook c1. This is taken off. King g2. Okay, once rook d2 happens, that seems dangerous, for example. But Black to play knight c5. Okay, so we have things like potentially a4 and then b3, trying to establish a dangerous pawn. b3 puts an end to that for a moment. Rook c3. This rook is tied down by the knight. The knight isn't in such a bad place. King h3 now, as though there's going to be a plan like this to infiltrate and maybe take on h6 later. Knight d7. Bishop e6. Okay, so now what's going on here? Knight c5, bishop d5. Knight goes back, so Black's waiting around to see what White's up to. If the king ever goes here, then it can be kicked back with the check, in fact. So for the moment the king's kept at bay here. Knight e3 to go to c4, looking at a5 though. So the knight is transferring to a place where it can still attack 2 pawns. So quite useful on c4. Knight f6, stopping the king for a moment. And then we have bishop e6. Okay, so this is leaving the pawn, but if knight takes e4, then there's knight d5 hitting the rook, hitting the knight. So that's the immune pawn for a moment. Rook c5, knight c4. So again, black is still under pressure here and still with this kind of bad bishop. That's the continuing theme here, as well as the potential further infiltration on light squares, which is prevented at the moment. King g7, f3, knight e8 is played. Now we see rook d2 putting more pressure on black's position. So both of these pawns are under great pressure. Black is under great scrutiny all the time. It's as though black's under an exam and white really isn't under so much pressure in comparison. So knight c7, bishop drops back for a moment. Black plays a4, giving up d6, so this sharpens things up. He didn't fancy trying to defend here, and in fact, yeah, it just seems quite miserable to try and defend that d6 pawn, or in fact nearly impossible. Something's dropping off here, it seems. If rook c6, knight takes a5. If knight b5, maybe knight takes a5 is possible. Something seems to be dropping off in any case in this position. So we have a4. Okay, knight takes d6. Black is trying to get a dangerous outside protected pawn. Bishop takes, rook takes. At least he's got rid of his bishop, which hasn't been doing much. So a3, is this enough for the pawn? It seems quite good with the idea of rook c2. Has Magnus slept up? And in fact, there's also knight b5 to d4. If that knight got to d4, wouldn't this be dangerous? Well, here, bishop d7 is played. So stopping any idea of knight b5 for a moment. And also the king can potentially come in the game now as well. Rook c2. And it seems really dangerous to take this pawn, because this pawn is only 2 steps away. But this is high precision chess here. We see the move bishop c6. So it will be at a big price to take that pawn because of the check winning the knight. And this price is actually paid here. So black has got faith in this pawn. Check. Rook takes c7. And now rook c2 pinning the bishop. Now at minimum, white doesn't want to leave a protected pawn, but he has got a tactic available here without penalty just to take on h7, because now if takes, there's taking here. So black plays king g6 and the rook returns to protect the bishop. If black ever commits with a2, then rook a7, and white doesn't mind swapping the bishop for that pawn. That rook and pawn ending will be winning. There's loads of pawns over here, 4 to 2. So black doesn't really want to push here. He plays king f6. And now a very accurate move again from Magnus. h5. And it looks potentially really quite dangerous, this position, for white after rook c1. Because what about a2? And is that going to be winning the exchange? This has been very well worked out here, this position. White's play absolutely fantastically worked out. Can you see what white plays here? It looks really quite dangerous. A lot of players will be very concerned about this pawn and what to do with it. White play, if I give you 5 seconds. Amazing move. Rook h7. So isn't the pawn free to go? a2. But unfortunately for black, guess what white plays here? No, he's not going to lose the exchange. That's a clue. If I give you 5 seconds, white's play, what would you play? Okay, bishop d5, mating net has been sealed around the king. Black had to resign here. If queening, we have check, and then rook f5, checkmate. Is there any escape here? If check here, king g4, it doesn't matter about this spike check. There's rook f7 threatening, doesn't help the pawn or anything. So there's nothing here for black to do, is getting mated. Yes, incredibly precise play from Magnus. Black, tried what seemed on the surface a reasonable pawn sack in the circumstances, and it was just refuted. Well, it had to lead to a bishop sack, a piece sack, a knight sacrifice. But yeah, very high precision play from Magnus to weave the mating net here. So that h5 was part of that, weaving the mating net in advance. So yeah, a fantastic game for Magnus, and one of actually 3 very beautiful games in round 5. So I'm hoping to get through to have a look at the others as well. Hope you enjoyed that one. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.